Hello and welcome to the UPSC Mains PYQ series by Shikara Academy. In this series, we are discussing all the GS Mains questions asked by UPSC over the past few years. In today's session, we will be discussing about the 2023 GS Paper 1, the 15-mark questions starting from question 11 to question number 15. So starting our discussion with the question number 1 today, that is, what are the main features of the Vedic society and religion? Do you think some of the features are still prevailing in Indian society? 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now the question is asking us three things. We have to write the main features of the Vedic society. That is the society during the Vedic period. What were the features of the society and the features of the religion during the Vedic period? Then we have to evaluate whether some of those features of the society as well as of the religion, whether or not they are prevalent in today's Indian society. Okay. Mapping it with the syllabus, we can see that it has been asked from the subject of Indian heritage and culture, and the main topic is has been asked from the ancient India, because the Vedic period comes under the ancient India part of the syllabus. Now, the approach that we'll be taking in is that in introduction, we will be describing the Vedic period. We will be writing about the timeline of the Vedic period. Then in body, we mainly address the demand of the question by writing the main features of the Vedic society. Features of the Vedic society. Then we write about the main features of the Vedic religion and the continuities of the Vedic society and Vedic features of the Vedic society and the Vedic religion in today's time. And then in conclusion, we will be summarizing the answer. Starting with the introduction. So the Vedic period, that is 1500 to 600 BCE, is a formative stage in Indian history that has shaped the foundation of Indian social, cultural and religious life. The Rig Veda and the later Vedic text. We have the four Vedic texts, that is the Rig Veda, Atharvaved, Yajurved and Samved. They provide insights into the nature of society and religion of that era. Now, what are the main features of the Vedic society that we can see from the Vedic books or the Vedic literature? So the main features was the first is the tribal organization. So early societies were mainly tribal, okay, with the Jana or the tribe as the main unit. Or later on, there were concept of the Mahajanpads or Janpads, they were developed. Then there was patriarchal family. The society and the family was mainly patriarchal. So authority rested with the father and lineage was traced through the males. Third is the Varna system. That is initially the fluid occupational groups. So the Varna system also originated in the Vedic society. So there were four Varnas, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. And later it hardened into the rigid caste hierarchy. So firstly, there was Varna system, and this Varna system was flexible or fluid. So one person, based on his or her capability, they can move between the different Varnas. But in the later part or in the later Vedic society, on the later Vedic period, this Varna system consolidated into the rigid caste hierarchy or the caste system. Then there was position of women. So women had respectable status and they participated in the yagnas, and some composed hymns. In the later Vedic period, their status declined. So the position of women in the Vedic society was very high, but after the Vedic period, in the later Vedic period, in the later stages of the Indian ancient history, the role and the status of women in the society declined. Then another important aspect of society is the economy. So economy was predominantly pastoral in the early phase, but in the later it with the use of agricultural tools like the iron tools, it became agricultural, trade and crafts expanded. So in the early Vedic or in the later Vedic period, so in the early Vedic, the main economy was driven by the pastoral activities. And in the later Vedic period, with the development of iron tools or the metallic tools, the society became or the economy became more and more agricultural. Then discussing the main features of the Vedic religion. What was the features of the religion during the time of Vedic era or the Vedic period? So first is the polytheism. So worship of the natural forces like Indra for rain, Agni for fire, and Varun for cosmic order. So different gods, different devs and deities were worshipped for rain, for fire, as well as for the cosmic order. Then there were there were rituals and the sacrifices or the yagnas. So these are the central religious practices. So the sacrifices or the yagnas are the central religious practices, and they are done in order to maintain the cosmic order, or there was a belief that doing these sacrifices or the yagnas will help in maintaining the cosmic order. Then, very important point, there is the absence of idol worship. So unlike today's time, okay, so there was absence of idol worship in the Vedic society or in the Vedic period. So deities were invoked through hymns and offerings, not the idols. So hymns, or that is the mantras and the shlokas, they were used in order to invoke the deities and not the statues or idols. Then there was philosophical development. So the later Vedic period saw the concept of karma, dharma, and moksha evolving in Upanishads. So in the later Vedic, so in the Vedic period, there were four Vedas that were developed. So four Veds were developed. In the later Vedic period, there were development of the Upanishads. And with the development of Upanishads, there was emergence of the concept of karma, moksha, and dharma. Now, the features of the Vedic society and Vedic religion, which of them do we still see in today's India or in today's Indian society? So the continuities in the Indian society today, continuities of this Vedic society and Vedic religion. So first is the Varna or the Jati system. Though constitutionally abolished, okay, constitutionally the Jati system or the Varna system has been abolished, but the caste identity still influence the social relations, and this is amply clear when we look at the political landscape of the country. Despite constitutional abolition of the Varna or the Jati system, the main political landscape in India is driven by the Jati or the Varna system. Then there are religious rituals. So yagnas, the chanting of Vedic mantra, and the fire sacrifices, they still continue in the Hindu practices. Then the philosophical idea. So idea of the karma, dharma, and moksha remain integral to the Indian thought. Then there is respect for knowledge. So the Brahminical tradition of scholarship finds echoes in reverence for the teachers and scriptures. So there is continuance of the jati system or the caste system. There are religious rituals that are still followed, and the philosophical ideas of karma, dharma, and moksha, they remain integral to the Indian thought process. Then, in conclusion, we can summarize the answer by writing that the Vedic period laid the cultural foundation of the Indian civilization. Okay, so Vedic period, it laid the cultural foundation of Indian civilization, while social inequalities like the caste persist. The philosophical depth and spiritual traditions of the Vedic age continue to shape India's identity even today. So we can conclude our answer by writing that the Vedic age or the practices during the Vedic era or the Vedic period, they continue to shape India's identity even in this 21st century. Moving on to the next question, that is question number 12. What are the major technological changes that introduced during the Sultanate period? How did those technological changes influence the Indian society? A 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now, this question is asking us two things. Firstly, it is asking about the major technological changes introduced during the Sultanate period. So, Sultanate period is the medieval period prior to the arrival of Mughals. Okay. Then we have to write that how did these technological changes that were developed or that were introduced during the Sultanate period, how are they influencing the Indian society in today's time? So mapping it with the syllabus, we can see that it has been asked from the subject of Indian heritage and culture, and the main topic is the medieval India or the Sultanate period. So the approach that we'll be taking in writing answers to such a question is that in introduction we describe the Delhi Sultanate. Okay, what comprises of Delhi Sultanate, what was the time period of the Delhi Sultanate, and then we write about the major technological changes that were introduced during the Delhi Sultanate. And then what influence these major technological changes are having, what major changes or what influence they are having on the current Indian society. Then in conclusion, we write a forward-looking conclusion because we have been asked about the influence on Indian society. Okay, so how the developments in the technological developments or the technological changes in the Sultanate period, how they influence the arrival of the Mughals and from Mughals to the Britishers until present times. Then starting with the introduction, so the Delhi Sultanate from 1206 to 1526 CE marked a new phase in the Indian history. So the Delhi Sultanate was established by uh, in the year 1206 by Qutbuddin Aibak from the slave dynasty, and it ended with Ibrahim Lodi, with the defeat of Ibrahim Lodi by the hands of Babur in the first battle of Panipat. So this period of Delhi Sultanate, it introduced several technological innovations from Central Asia and the Islamic world. So there were five dynasties in the Delhi Sultanate, and four of them were Turks and one of them were Afghans. So mainly they bought the technological innovation from the Central Asia and the Islamic world. And these changes significantly influenced the agriculture, industry, and architecture and warfare in India. So what were these major technological changes? So first was the changes in agriculture. So that is for the most important is the introduction of the Persian wheel that we call as the Arghatta for irrigation. It has widespread adoption of the iron plowshares, and the new crops like wheat, barley, and fruits were also introduced. Then is the changes or the major technological changes in the architecture. So they were use of true arc and dome instead of the corbel system, and application of lime mortar and glazed tiles in construction. So the materials that was used in construction was like was changed, and also there were changes in the architectural structure of the buildings. There were development of new building styles such as mosques, forts, and tombs. Then there are military technology. So there was introduction of cavalry-based warfare, use of horseshoe stirrups, and use of heavy armor. So the heavy armor were introduced. The cavalry-based warfare was also introduced, and the early use of gunpowder and firearms towards the later Sultanate period. So in the second half of or in the later stages of the Sultanate period, there was introduction of the gunpowder and firearms in the weaponry. Then there were textiles and crafts. So there was growth of cotton and silk weaving, introducing the spinning wheel, that is charkha. So two important types of wheels were introduced. First is the Persian wheel for the agriculture, and then there's the spinning wheel or charkha for the textile and crafts. And there were development of paper making technology, facilitating record keeping and literature. So that is one of the reason why a lot of literature uh, that was written or that was developed in that Sultanate period is still available today. Then what changes these technological changes? What influence they had on the Indian society? So first is that economic impact. So it improved the irrigation. So introduction of the partial wheat and as well as the other tools, the plows and the new crops, they improved the irrigation and boosted the agriculture productivity and trade. The textile craft flourished, making India a hub for the global trade. Second is the cultural impact. That is the Indo-Islamic architecture transformed the cultural landscape, blending Indian and Persian styles. Then there is military impact. So there was impact on economy, there was impact on culture, there was impact on military, intellectual, and social impact. So stronger cavalry and firearms changed the warfare patterns and helped in consolidation of the Sultanate rule. So Sultanate rules, like these five dynasties in this Sultanate period, they were very dominant military wise in the especially in the northern part of the country. Then there are intellectual impact. So paper making encouraged education, growth of the madrasas, and the preservation of knowledge. Then the social impact. What overall social impact was there on the society? Introduction of the new crops and technologies reshaped the rural livelihoods, while the urban centers like Delhi, Agra, and Jaunpur they prospered. So in conclusion, we can write a forward-looking conclusion by writing technological innovations during the Sultanate period not only enhanced agriculture industry, they enhanced agriculture, they enhanced architecture, but they also integrated India into the wider Asian and Islamic networks. Okay, and these changes laid the groundwork for the socio-economic and cultural transformation that continued under the Mughals as well. Okay, so Mughals, they were also Islamic forces and they also were Turks in origin. Moving on to the next question, that is question number 13. How did colonial rule affect the tribals in India and what was the tribal response to the colonial operation? A 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now, mapping it with the syllabus, we can see that it has been asked from the subject of history, that is the modern history, and from the topic freedom struggle, its various stages and important contributions from the different parts of the country. So this question is mainly focusing or it is mainly asking about the impact of colonial policies, the colonial rule on the tribal in India, and because of this colonial oppression or because of these colonial policies and colonial rule, how did the tribal they respond to this oppression by the colonial occupiers? So the approach that we'll be taking in answering such a question is that in introduction, we describe the colonial impact on tribals. Just in a brief line, we will be describing the colonial impact on tribals. Then in body, we write about the effect of colonial rule on tribals and the tribal response to the colonial oppression. Okay, we are addressing the demand of the question by writing the effect of colonial rule on tribals and their response. Then in conclusion, we will be summarizing the answer. So starting with the introduction, colonial rule in India disrupted the traditional life of tribal communities. Their symbiotic relationship with forests, land, and local markets were severely affected by the British economic and administrative policies. So that was the main impact. And all this led to the social, cultural, and economical dislocation of the tribals, eventually sparking the widespread tribal resistance. So the colonial policies or the rule, it led to the dislocation and which led to the resistance. Then we have to discuss the effects of the colonial rule on tribals. So first is the loss of land and forest rights. So the permanent settlement and zamindari system deprived tribals of their customary land. And the forest acts, they restricted the shifting cultivation or the jhum agriculture and the hunting gathering practices that were mainly underdone by the tribals. Then there was economic exploitation. The tribal people were forced into bonded labors for the moneylenders, for the landlords, and for the traders. Then there was introduction of the commercial crops and the cash economy, which further disrupted their subsistence living. Next is the cultural disruption. So the missionary activities and introduction of new religions led to the cultural alienation. So there were economic exploitation and there was cultural alienation or the religious alienation. So breakdown of the traditional institutions like the monkey munda system in the Chota Nagpur Plateau region. That was the example of the cultural disruption. All of this led to alienation and poverty. There was large scale displacement for railways, for mining and plantation, which uprooted the tribals from their own ancient or the historical regions. And many of the tribals, they become landless laborers and the migrant workers. Now, all this manifested as a tribal response to the colonial oppression. So the tribals, they resisted. This was highlighted by the armed uprisings, that is the Santhal rebellion of 1855 to 56, and the Mundas Ulgulan from 1899 to 1900, and Coal rebellion. So these were the three major tribal rebellions or the tribal uprising, armed uprising against the colonial oppression. Then there was religious movement. So Birsa's Mundas movement combined spiritual revival with the anti-colonial struggle. Then there was everyday resistance for the desertation of the plantations, refusal to pay taxes, and continued practice of shifting cultivation or the jhum cultivation despite restrictions and banning. and formation of alliances. Some tribal groups, they aligned with the peasant movement and later participated in the national freedom struggle. So in conclusion, we summarize the answer by writing the colonial policies marginalized the tribals economically and culturally. So there was marginalization, the economic marginalization as well as the cultural marginalization, which led to the widespread distress. And this distress manifested as a form of resistance. However, their spirited resistance, ranging from armed revolts to socio-religious movements, reflected their resilience and significantly contributed to India's broader struggle against the colonial oppressions. Moving on to the next question, that is question number 14. Comment on the resource potentials of the long coastline of India and highlight the status of natural hazard preparedness in these areas. A 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now, it is a question mainly from the subject of geography, but it has aspects of environment as well as disaster management in it. Okay, so it is quite an applied question. So the approach that we'll be taking in answering such a question is that in introduction we describes India's long coastline. Okay, because that has been asked in the question. So we deal with the introduction. We deal with the India's coastline in the introduction itself. Then in body, we address the demand of the question by writing the resource potentials of the coastline and the natural hazard preparedness along the coastline. Then in conclusion, we will be summarizing the answer. So India has a long coastline of about 7,500 kilometers stretching across 9 states and 2 union territories. It is rich in resources and supports livelihood, trade, and ecological diversity. However, it is also highly vulnerable to natural hazards such as cyclones, tsunamis, cultural erosion, making preparedness crucial. So here we have introduced the answer by writing about the India's long coastline, from how many states it is, how many states are contributing to it, how many union territories are contributing it. They are rich in resources, and we have also highlighted that they are also vulnerable to natural hazards, because in the body of the answer we have to write about these natural hazard preparedness. So it is essential to make a connection between the introduction and the body of the answer. So writing the body, we describe the resource potentials of the coastline. First is the marine resources. So there are rich fisheries, because India, we have a tropical uh, oceans here. Aquaculture and seaweed cultivation is there. Then there is potential of the deep sea mining of the polymetallic nodules, hydrocarbons, and natural gas in the nearby sea. Then there are economic opportunities. So the ports and shipping routes drive the foreign trade. About 95% of India's trade by volume is carried out by the ports in the along the marine route. And it is also important for tourism, and coastal industries provide large scale employment. So there are many of these coastal areas, they are attractive tourist destinations, especially Goa, Puducherry, and we have Andaman Nicobar, Lakshadweep. So they are important tourism, as well as important for tourism and the coastal industries. Then there are renewable energy, because they have enormous potential for the offshore wind, tidal, and the wave energy. So all these three are the renewable sources of energy. So the coastline, the Indian coastline, has an immense potential, enormous potential of the renewable energy. Then there is ecological significance. The mangroves, coral reefs, and estuaries support biodiversity and act as natural barriers against the storms. Now we have to evaluate the natural hazard preparedness along the coastline. So what are the vulnerabilities are there? So the eastern coast of India, that is adjoining the Bay of Bengal, it is more prone to cyclones, storm surges, and floods. The west coast also faces coastal erosion, sea level rise, and the occasional cyclone. So the frequency of cyclones is more in the eastern coast as compared to the western coast. Then there is tsunami risk exist along the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, because as there was case in 2004 tsunami. Then what preparedness measures are there? So first is the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services, that was established for early warning for tsunamis and the storm surges along the coastline. Then there was Disaster Management Act, that provides a framework for the coastal disaster preparedness. Then there are construction of cyclone shelters, mangrove restoration, and coastal zone management plans. So over the last couple of decades, India has made a tremendous, tremendous progress, a very positive progress towards the making of these cyclone shelters and and also improving the forecasting by IMD. So the IMD forecasts a cyclone or the storm surges, and the administration shifts the or it guides the entire population that lives along the coast to the higher grounds or to the cyclone shelters, so that the mortality or casualties as a result of these cyclones are have come down drastically. So, improved forecasting by IMD and real-time dissemination through the mobile alerts. And nowadays, even for the heavy rainfall, the IMD it gives out very frequent and timely and regular updates through the SMSs. Then there are programs like the National Cyclone Risk Management Project, which enhance the resilience. Then, in conclusion, we can summarize the answer by writing India's coastline is both an economic lifeline and a zone of ecological wealth. So, it is important for both economy as well as ecology. So, India's coastline has significance for both economy as well as ecology, while resource potential is immense, especially the uh, deep sea mining and the availability of renewable sources. The natural hazards they remain a constant threat. So, strengthening the early warning system, climate resilient infrastructure, and community participation is vital for sustaining the coastal development. So, the first line here is our summarizing. The first part of the conclusion is the summarizing part, and the second part of the conclusion is the forward looking or a way forward part. Moving on to the final question, that is question number 15. Identify and discuss the factors responsible for diversity of natural vegetation in India. So we have to describe or we have to write the various factors that has led to diversity of natural vegetation in India. And then we have to assess the significance of wildlife sanctuaries in rainforests regions of India. So a 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now it is a question that has been asked in GS paper 1. So it can be categorized as a subject as a question of geography, but this question is predominantly a question of the environment. So it is also a pride question. Okay. So seeing the approach, introduction, we will be describing the diversity of natural vegetation in India. Then in body, we address the demand of question by writing the various factors which are responsible for diversity of natural vegetation in the country and the significance of wildlife sanctuaries, particularly in the rainforest region. So we have rainforest regions along the western Ghats and in the northeastern part of the country. And then in conclusion, we write a forward looking conclusion or a way forward. So we can start by writing the introduction that India is one of the world's mega diverse countries. So we are a mega diverse country hosting a wide range of natural vegetation from alpine meadows to tropical rainforest. So we have an entire spectrum of natural vegetation starting from tropical rainforest, the deciduous forest, the moist deciduous, dry deciduous, the alpine forest, the alpine meadows. We also have the desert type of vegetation or the uh, drier vegetation. So this diversity arises from various physiographic, climate, and edaphic factors. So the physiography, climate, and edaphic factors, all of them, they contribute to this range of natural vegetation in the country. The wildlife sanctuaries in rainforest regions, they further safeguard this ecological wealth. So this diversity or this range of natural vegetation is India's ecological wealth, and the wildlife sanctuaries, particularly when they are present in the rainforest regions. Okay, when they are declared in the rainforest regions, they safeguard the ecological wealth of the country. Now, please note that the wildlife sanctuaries are not just limited to the tropical regions; they are also in the alpine regions. They are also in the deciduous or in the drier landscape also. So, in the body of the answer, we discuss the factors responsible for diversity of natural vegetation, starting with the physiography. So, the most important factor is the physiography. So we have different physiographical formations such as the Himalayas, the Deccan Plateau, the Indo-Gangetic Plains. They create a diverse ecological niches. And here we also can write about the Thar Desert. Then differences or the changes in the climate, the variation in the climate. So there are variations in rainfall, temperature, humidity that also influence the vegetation types. The Western Ghats and the Northeast receive the heavy rainfall and they support the evergreen forests. Then third factor is the soil type. So alluvial soils favor the grasslands. The black soils they support the deciduous vegetation, while the laterite soils sustain the evergreen forest. So mainly three different type of soils in the country, and all three of them they support the different type of natural vegetation. Alluvial soils they support or they favor the grasslands. The black soil they support or they favor the deciduous type of vegetation, and the laterite soils they favor or they support the evergreen forest or the tropical forests. Then there is altitude and latitude. So the altitudinal variations and the latitudinal variations also uh, gives rise to the variation in the natural vegetation. So vegetation ranges from tropical in the southern India to alpine in the Himalayas. So in the southern part of the country that lies in the lower latitudes. So that is tropical, that lies in the tropical zone. So it has tropical vegetation. The Himalayas, they have very high altitude peaks. So there we have are the alpine type of vegetation. Then there are biotic as well as anthropogenic factors. So traditional agriculture, grazing and conservation practices also shape the vegetation pattern. So there are mainly five factors, that is physiography, climate, soil type, altitude and latitude, and the anthropogenic factors. Now we write the significance of the wildlife sanctuaries in the rainforest regions. So first is the biodiversity conservation. So sanctuaries like the Silent Valley, the Periyar, the Namdafa, and the Nokrek, they protect the endangered flora and fauna. So Silent Valley and Periyar, they are situated in the Western Ghats in the southern part of the country, and the Namdafa and the Nokrek, they are present in the northeastern part of the country. Then there is climate regulation. So rainforests, they act as carbon sinks and reduce the climate change impacts. So the wildlife sanctuaries are protecting the rainforest regions. So that is leading to a reduction of the climate change impact, and because of, it provides an increased or enhanced carbon sink. Then there is watershed protection, preserve headwaters of important rivers and ensuring a perennial water flow, especially in the Deccan region or the peninsular region. Fourth is the livelihood support. So there are ecotourism activities and the non-timber forest products as well as medicinal plants that benefit the local communities. And then there is scientific and educational value. So the wildlife sanctuaries, they provide scope for research on rare species, genetic resources, and ecosystem functioning. Then moving on to the conclusion. So India's diverse natural landscape is shaped by its geographical and climatic mosaic. Okay, so we have a mosaic of geography as well as climate, and that determines the diverse natural vegetation in the country. The wildlife sanctuaries in rainforests, they play a vital role in preserving biodiversity, ecological balance, and sustainable livelihood. Now, the way forward part, that is strengthening conservation with community participation, is essential for the long-term ecological security. Now, the PDF of these model answers will be available to you on Shikara Academy's Telegram channel. Thank you.